Yeah, so give me a little bit about you and how you got into this space of writing. As I think that's primarily what you do,
Yep.
not a face of a podcast or anything.
Not yet.
So, and I've read a couple of your articles. Not yet.
Not yet.
All right, that's a sneak peek. Um, but yeah, how do you find yourself here today as a person in this deconstruction world?
Yeah, that is, it's been a long journey, and I think about my deconstruction journey a lot because I'm part of the board for the New Evangelicals right now. I was doing some volunteer work before. I used to schedule all of Tim's podcasts for about 2 years. So really involved in this space as far as like things available to people, right, to process through their own
Yeah,
deconstruction. And I think that has helped me kind of think through my journey. What has that looked like? And I think really it has been this kind of revolving door for me ever since I was in high school, really. I remember leaving and not going to church for the first time because of some things that happened then. And then I would try and go back and think, nope, this is really where I want to be. And then something would happen again where it would be like, I don't think I align with what's going on here. And so I would leave. And that, so
yeah,
there was this sort of revolving door.
yeah.
I left in 2017, and I've only been back to church a handful of times, and really just
Mm,
for the purposes of like being there for Christmas with my mom. Right. And
yeah.
mostly though, like my journey, even before 2017, I was really like exploring a lot of different options. And I have this like this thought that even a broken clock is right twice a day. So I was trying to find what could I take from
Mm,
these different denominations or different even
yeah.
like I explored the Mormon faith for a little while. I explored some Jehovah's Witness
Mm,
like doctrine and things like that, just seeing like what is out there, because we're all being
yeah,
told what we should believe. Do I actually believe that?
for sure.
And I think
Mm,
maybe one of the most important moments for me in my journey was when I read the book, The Shack. I think I read that in 2010. And it really resonated with me, and it really brought up a lot of questions for me. So after that, it was just like being curious. I think that's really when I started to be curious about what is real for me and what have I just decided I believe because somebody else told me I'm supposed to.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good because like I know I reached out to you to come on this podcast. So I read your article. You just came back from theology beer camp, and it was entitled "Can Oppressors Become Allies?" And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like what I am feeling. Like it's very much in terms of even this platform. I've had guests that have come on that have been oppressed and hurt by the church, and have said, no more, all done. I don't want to be a part of that. Kind of revolving door, kind of what you're mentioning in your story. Trying to poke in, nope, not for me. And then I have people that have come on that are just always been in the church, always have been a leader, always have been a pastor. Ministry has been their thing. Sure, their faith has evolved and become miles from maybe where they began, and so that's really kind of where I was like, okay, I kind of understand what you're saying with this article is specifically around those white millennial men where they historically have benefited from Christianity, a religious system that they can have platforms in. And then now, for whatever reason, we have found them also in this post-evangelical space as well,
Yeah.
benefiting, and people are just still kind of flocking towards this light, this aura these white men have. And so you wrote, and I'm going to quote, I'm going to read it. They tend to be the ones with the largest audiences, even when it was white men who stood at the helm of harm. So why is it now that they are at the head in the space too? I'm not mad about it, but I'm curious why it's true. What is it that seems worth listening to? Why do we trust them so implicitly? And so for me, I feel like you're pointing out this tension that these are very often the figures who, or those like them, have caused harm. Yet you suggest their voices might still be valuable today. So as you put it, you write, they have a role the oppressed can never have. to bring the message of liberation to other oppressors. And so my question is, why is it so crucial and so difficult to even open that door to these perspectives? And so what are the potential gains and the very real risks we have?
Yeah. It is, I think, such a touchy subject, right? There's a few names that I can think of right off the top of my head. Carl Lentz is one of them, right, with Hillsong, and that just the damage that was caused. And then now he wants to show that he's repented and he's different. And how do we trust that that's true? I think he's an extreme example because the harm was so vast and so big. But I think even there are these smaller examples of, I'm going to use Tim as an example, Tim Whitaker from the New Evangelicals. He was a drummer in his church, not necessarily at the helm of leadership, but still in a leadership role. And then he had an idea and started the New Evangelicals, which has really taken off. And it has become a space for such beautiful community and education and all of these things. So that to me is such a great example of the on-ramp, or maybe it's more the off-ramp for people, right? He created this place that I resonated with. That's why I became connected with that space. But why? Why did I resonate with the things he said? And it did, it brought me into a place of community where now I'm hearing from other voices. So his work led me to other voices. And I think that is the important piece. It cannot be that it's just him. And he knows that. And I think that's why that space continues to grow. I think where it can be, there is a level of privilege there. And I think without acknowledging that, that's where it can get dangerous. But when I was at Theology Beer Camp, so I wrote that right after that. And there was actually an article about these white men with these platforms now in the deconstruction space. And it really felt like we're eating our own kind of moment. And I feel like we really can't afford to do that in this space. Like the whole purpose of deconstruction was there's harm. There are harmful theologies. There are harmful, doctrines that we all have felt the weight of that. And in a lot of cases, we've had our own experiences with that. It's not helpful to eat our own. We need to figure out how we maybe approach this idea of liberation theology, which altogether is not just about liberating the oppressed people. It is about bringing both the oppressed and the oppressors into their full humanity. And it's necessary when we have the oppressors realize the harm they've done to create a way for them to also help other oppressors see that. I can say as a person in my own situation, in my own story, I'm a woman in the church. I definitely had more to offer, but because I was a woman, could never lead and all of these things. I was also a single parent in the church. That's a whole another experience. So in many ways, I was oppressed, but I also benefited from this system where I was like a Bible study leader. I was looked to in some of these ways. And how did I harm people? I'm sure that I did. So some of us actually are on both sides of this. So I think that it can't just be, we're only out here trying to serve people that were oppressed. Yes, we need to do that. And yes, that is so important. And I believe is the message of the gospel. But there's this whole other group of people, we cannot just write them off. And to do that would be to lessen the impact of what I feel liberation theology is really all about.
I think even on the other side of the coin, celebrity-wise, a Russell Brand, for instance, in recent of now fully being Christian, and I use those quotes real of like, I'm questioning the authenticity of a Russell Brand faith. I question and continue to question the Christian phase, or I don't even know if it phase really, for Kanye West. And I think that's just the opposite side of the coin. And I can think back to when I was younger and very much in that evangelical space of how much I would have celebrated Christian Kanye West. And I've seen from a distance the explosion amongst evangelicals when he had that Jesus is King album, or even now celebrating a Russell Brand on the set of The Chosen. And and so just like this celebration. And so
Yeah.
so I think what I'm trying to say is even within this deconstruction space, it's hard to um, delineate between the ex evangelical pastor who's now become a progressive, and how come we can't have that same celebration but be stuck in the mindset of once an oppressor, always an oppressor. Um, and I wonder what your perspective is. Do you think it's maybe we're just caught up on that idea of, yeah, I guess what I'm asking is why do you think we get caught up on that idea? Once an oppressor, always an oppressor.
I think this is kind of related to like cancel culture as well, right? And there's a book, Richard Rohr wrote a book
Mm,
called The Universal Christ, and he talks in there about how we require like this pound of flesh from people. When someone has done us wrong, we need them to pay for
yeah.
that. And so I really think it does kind of come down to
Mm,
that. If we've been harmed by someone or we see that harm has been done, we need them to pay for that harm. And if they
yeah.
so they're these are my own opinions, and I'm sure people who may be
Yeah,
listening have their own thoughts about this, but at what
for sure.
point do we say, well, that's not really what the gospel says, or that's not really what Jesus was getting at? He didn't go after anyone for a pound of flesh.
Mm,
He did hold them accountable. Like I'm thinking of when he was writing the sins, or writing in the sand. We don't really know what he was writing, but he's
yeah.
talking to them and saying, well, if you haven't sinned, then go ahead and throw the first stone. He didn't come at them and make them pay. But what he did is he needed them to
Right.
acknowledge their position in what was happening. And so I think we don't really allow for that acknowledgement and someone to be held accountable, and for that to be, I'm going to say, enough. And maybe it isn't enough. What we need really is like, maybe you sit in the back for a while and you listen, and you really
Mm,
start to listen to those
yeah.
other voices. And maybe, there is accountability that's absolutely required. But to get in this mindset of once an oppressor, always an oppressor, we need to see the payment. We need there to be a pound of flesh. I think that's a very human response. I think
Yeah.
that's totally normal. But is it really beneficial and helpful to them as a human to like not allow them to really come into their full humanity here, where they see what they've done has been harmful, where they
Mm,
acknowledge that, they do the work, right? Like, I wouldn't know that some of these other voices in this space even existed if it weren't for Tim Whitaker and people like him.
mm,
So we need
yeah.
them. We need their curiosity, and like he has all these connections now to even more voices. We need that in order to hear some of the voices that have been marginalized. And it is unfortunate that it has been that way, where some of these writers and speakers, people of color and the LGBTQIA plus community, like, we haven't heard their voices because they have been marginalized. They have been oppressed.
Yeah.
But now we have people that are bringing their voices to the forefront. We have to make a road to that. We have to be curious of like, how do we get there? It can't just be that we're there. There is a road to
Yeah.
it. And I wish there wasn't. I wish it was as easy as just like, now we just listen to all these voices that have been marginalized, but that is not
Mm,
the reality and that is a byproduct of the systems and structures that are put in place to oppress people. And as we break those down, then we get those voices become more amplified. And I think that should be the goal of those oppressors, right? Now, how do I platform
yeah.
these marginalized voices? Not take my place over here as now another platform person, but to platform those who have been marginalized. I think that is like such a beautiful, that is like the beautiful goal to me of what this could really be
Mm,
in this space.
yeah. Yeah, it's totally true. And there's even just biases within social media platforms as well that are, algorithms. Like we know there's studies within people that are even just deconstructed or against Christian nationalism. Their voices already are being suppressed,
Yeah.
and so you can only then even imagine the compounding factor there involving race and gender ideology as well. We're going to further, the system as a whole is furthering the suppression within our own deconstruction bubble world. And so it's just not beneficial. So as you said, we do need folks like a Tim Whitaker and in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because when I had Tim on the show, that's exactly kind of he brought up the notion of when we're in these spaces, Christian spaces, we look to this one person on stage every weekend and week out telling us what to believe. And so he was using that as a challenge within the deconstruction space of, I think, even as a reminder for himself to not become that like very thing that he was trying not to be. And so it's always refreshing and it's always nice to know. And as Tim goes on Instagram all the time and saying, no, there's a board making these decisions, there's that accountability, and there's open communication within the platform, and always bringing in other voices outside of just white millennial men. And so I think that's, as you said, it's like that's what needs to happen to move forward in this space. And so for you in your journey of deconstructing, how have you navigated this difficult work of examining your own biases, especially towards those who have been part of those systems that have harmed you? And how do you avoid replicating the very power dynamics that we're also trying to dismantle at the same time?
Yeah, that is, it's constantly, I think, a struggle. And there, we talked a little bit at the beginning about like, or even before we started recording, I think I said I'm taking a couple days off of Instagram, and really because this idea of like, okay, rest is also resistance here. I need to rest. We can't just power through. Mm-hmm. To power through and just create this like sense of urgency around like, we just need to change all these things. We will do it wrong if we do that. Yeah. So I do try and be really thoughtful around like, what am I doing? I've taken a little bit of a break from writing as well, because I want to make sure that I'm not just like putting things out. I also need to put more out than I have, but, I do have biases. And I think that if I said I didn't, I would be shortchanging myself and other people in my life. I try to be very aware of like when a thought pops in my head that I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? That is a result of like some old thought that I had. Why did that thought even come into my head? It's being curious and really not allowing for shame to get in the way, right? I think for me especially, but those of us who did grow up in this high control, like shame-based culture of the church, shame is like the go-to. If I do something that's bad or wrong, now I feel shame about it. And so like, why even try? There's a little bit of that I have to fight through. I think one of the things that I'm currently working through is, as a woman who was a single parent, I had my own experiences with like not with this oppression in a way, right? It was my own experience with that, but also I am a white woman. So what does that mean? What have I benefited from? What systems have I benefited from? There is this really just weird dynamic there, where I do need to like realize, what am I accountable for? Having been someone who really benefited from the system, but I also didn't get married at 20 and have this family and all this stuff. So my story is a little bit different, where I was a single parent. I didn't benefit in the same ways that other white women benefited, because they got married and they had families and they had what looked like the correct way of doing things. I didn't do anything the right way. I had a baby before I ever got married. Like, there's just a lot about my story that, I was not set up to gain in the same way, but that doesn't mean I didn't gain anything. Right. So it is like being very honest with myself. I think if I said I didn't benefit in any way, that would be not correct. That would be a lie. I would be lying to myself. And I do want to be honest about that. We had a board retreat not that long ago, actually. And Tim was talking about something, and he's like, yes, we need to be careful, as, he was talking, it was me and one other person, about as white men and even white women. And in that moment, even I was like, oh, why do you include me in that? But yes, I am included in that. And really being willing to say that and acknowledge that and understand what that has meant for other people. I think the other thing that I also tried to do is really read authors that are marginalized voices, hold space for their experience. You know, I really have spent a lot of time in the last couple of years understanding what it means to hold space for other people. Um, I know in my own life, I've been quick to assume things about people or to try and make
Yeah.
situations better for them or try and, you know, comfort them. And really, people want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want their experience to be validated just because it is their experience. So I think all of those things together have really created this way of leaning into this community in a different way. You know, I really do
Mm.
want to hear all the voices. I want my voice to be heard, and I want other people's voices to be heard, because we're all part of this. And I'll go back to what I said before, of like, if we get into this space of eating our own, then we will lose out on so much. And that means that we need to make room for all the voices, even the ones that aren't doing it quite right. You know, there are for sure some people who they're trying their best and maybe they're messing up. We need to make room for that too, because we are humans and we will make mistakes. As long as we acknowledge and own those things and are accountable, in the way that we would have liked other people to have been in the world we came from,
Yeah.
we're going to be just fine. Right. And so I just want to make sure that I am showing up in that way. And I make mistakes
For
too.
sure.
All this, you know, I know that I do. And so realizing like I need to have the same grace for other people. And I try to remember, there's this, I don't remember where I learned it, maybe in school. I have my degree in organizational leadership. So really like identifying what are good traits of good leaders, right? What does a good leader look like? And one of the things that I remember reading about was the way that we can be it's so easy for me to justify my actions and my decisions because I have all the information. I have all the context of the decision and the way that I behaved. But I may hold you to a higher standard, or I may not be able to, like, I don't understand your justification because I don't have all that same information. So I think trying to also remember that, like, I can easily justify my actions. I have to give that same understanding to somebody else. They are doing something that makes sense to them. So maybe they don't have all the information. Maybe they need a little bit more mentoring in some way. Maybe somebody does need to reach out to them and ask them a question because they just don't know. So it's like assuming positive intent, giving people the same amount of opportunity to, you know, like understand why they did something, understand the context, and not being so quick to jump on, you know, negative motives and things like that.
Yeah. It's my thoughts around even just being called out of for white women as well for in your position is similar to I think what a lot of us have to do within the space is also remember, yeah, we've been hurt. Yeah, we've been, you know, oppressed in every which way. We've been lied to, manipulated, and whatever it may be. But there are also things we have benefited from. And I think that even just outside of like understanding any privileges we may or may not hold, but also understanding like I think just from a positive side of things, just recognizing areas in which you have been blessed, I guess, outside of just whatever socioeconomic norm may be at play, but just the idea of, yeah, we've been hurt, we've been pushed down, but we've also been blessed. And so that can also just act as a springboard to get back up and move forward and make change as well. And so when I look back even in my own journey of having grown up in the church and been hurt by people within the church and the theological systems and whatever it may be, and also being a victim of sexual abuse within outside of church, but within that same lifetime, I think about the benefits I've had of like I've made friends, I've made I've learned a lot of life traits, you know, and all these. I have positive memories that somehow outweigh the bad ones, and so I can use that from a personal level to that have gotten me to get back up, to rediscover my voice and rediscover who I can be within this space, in whether it can be daunting of a task of, oh my gosh, this system is way larger than I ever thought it was, and I'm just a little cog in the wheel. And so it's like, what do you say to someone that is like, it's so big, I don't know what to do, I'm just me, one person, and I don't have that much, quote, like talent. I don't know what to offer, but I have seen something in me that is telling me to get up, but I don't know where to start.
Yeah. You know, I really struggle with that idea of like, there's so much to do, right? And like, somehow I feel like the weight of a lot of that falls on my shoulders. And the reality is that it doesn't, right? If we don't need to do all the things, we need to find the one thing that we really can make an impact in. And I was recently speaking with my therapist and having a really hard time. And she was like, you're probably struggling from compassion fatigue. And having that word was super helpful, because I think we do see, especially right now, we're not dealing with like one social issue, right? There's so many things that are being impacted across our social landscape, and like people's lives really are being impacted in these negative ways. And it's not just like food security or human trafficking or, like education. It's everything feels like it's happening all at one time. So for people who do feel a lot of like empathy and really do want to make a difference, that can be so overwhelming. And so being able to, first of all, just like name that, right? There is this level of compassion fatigue, especially if we're spending a lot of time on our social media networks. Taking a break is a good idea. Acknowledging, so for me, and this was another reminder for my therapist, like acknowledge my privilege. I can take a break from it. And I acknowledge that. And then I do what I can from where I am. That doesn't mean I can do everything, because I still can't. I have kids to take care of and a job. I have a full-time job I have to do, and all of these things. We all have these demands on our time. What does matter to me? Right? That is a question that I've asked myself. I have done the work of going through and figuring out what are my core values. One of my core values is restoration. Another one is community. So what do I do in that way to like support those values that I have? So that's why I wanted to be part of the New Evangelicals in the way that I am. That matters a lot to me. Tim's been advertising this app. It's free for everyone that wants to be part of it to get away from the Facebook group. So I'm part of developing that app and making sure that this community space is available for people to have these conversations, so that there are places to amplify other voices and for people to be able to have, ask hard questions. It took me time to figure this out though. I was trying to do a lot of different things. I got my coaching certification and I got my Enneagram coaching certification and I did all these things. But what I really want to do is write. What I really want to do is be writing, putting out my thoughts, having conversations like this, because I am willing to engage in some conversations that might be difficult. And maybe somebody will hear something in this and be like, wow, I hadn't thought about that thought that pops into my head, and asking that question of where did that come from? What do I need to be curious about? Maybe somebody listening has never thought to do that, So it's just figuring out like, what can I do? Of course, I think about, we all spend money every day. What can I do to make an impact with my money? So I think I've maybe bought 3 Starbucks since September. And I read an article this week that the CEO said, like, this boycott is making an impact. That feels like, okay, I didn't spend $5 a day on coffee. I'm one person, but I'm not the only person. So when we do things and other people start doing it too, now the impact becomes greater and it does start to matter, right? So I'm just trying to do what I can where I am. And part of that is how I spend my money. I do rest. I think that's really important to be involved in this work in any way. We do have to take care of ourselves. We do need to find joy. Joy is really important, because without that, we will just get bogged down. And I don't want to be somebody that is in the business of that bypassing of hard emotions. We do need to feel the sadness and the pain. I mean, this morning I was in tears over just like, things are hard. The weight of the world is heavy right now. And so we need to feel those things.
Sure.
You know, journaling can be really helpful. I've been working with my youngest on writing gratitude lists every day, because sometimes when we see everything we lack, we forget that we have also things to be grateful for. And so it's just shifting that perspective. But that tension of just being in positivity mindset, you know, is also like, you got to balance it. We really do have to allow space for those really hard feelings. Play is really important. Getting outside, you know, what are the things that are going to make us feel whole as a person and nurtured? And it's different for everyone. So for me, it was really important to find out what those things are. My youngest today, he's like, I'm feeling a lot of stress because we're not getting outside in nature. I need to do that. I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. Let's go for a hike. Let's do it. You know, so I think doing that kind of work, just sitting down and like, what makes me feel nurtured right now? What would really help me? And I'm going to take one more minute here to talk about this thing. My daughter the other day told me about, she's been seeing on TikTok, these posts about dopamine menus. So it's like, and I haven't done it yet, but it is like writing down the things that you know will give you that shot of dopamine, right? Something that's going to make you feel really good. But then on the other side of that, I was having a conversation with a friend about it yesterday, and I thought, well, there are things that I know give me dopamine. For example, scrolling through Instagram, I get that shot of dopamine, but if I follow that through to the end, like, okay, now I've spent an hour, I don't ever feel good at the end of that hour for having done that. So I think there's like the real dopamine menu of like going for a walk, getting outside, journaling, drinking a glass of water, like some of these really good things. And then there's the like, I think this is dopamine, but it's not menu, right? Like getting online and scrolling for 2 hours is probably not going to be the thing to really nurture you. So I'm going to make that menu for myself, both sides, so that when I'm feeling stuck, I also have something to refer to, because I think that's something that we can really feel as well. Like, I don't know what to do. What do I do? So now I go scroll Instagram, or I go take a nap because I'd rather just check out, or, you know, whatever the vice might be. Shopping. I have definitely spent more money than I should recently because I'm trying to like feel better. So
it's because you're saving money.
Exactly. I'm not buying Starbucks, so I can shop on the TikTok shop instead. I think it's just being aware, right? And doing that kind of work to understand like what are my values, what is important to me, and then just figuring out what it is. And I don't, you know, creativity comes in all different forms. And I know a lot of people might say, well, I'm not creative. I don't write. I don't want to do this podcast. There's a really good book called The Artist's Way, and it really helped me find my voice and figure out like, what is it that I want to like put into the world, whether that was just for my kids to have from me, or is it something I want to put out more broadly? You know, Substacks don't have to be for anybody to read. You can just get on there and write stuff. So I've like probably 30 drafts in there that I've never published. So I think it's just a matter of like trying stuff, really just try things and see what feels like a good, like it feels impactful. Right. And then ask people, what are you doing? What are you involved in? Are there, you know, meetups of people that are trying to figure that out too, right? Like community, being out there in the world and seeing what other people are up to can also be a really good way to do that.
Yeah, you just got to get started. You just got to find, and it's going to take a long time. I know for me, prior to this podcast and my Instagram page, I tried a million different things and projects around to find self-fulfillment. So I'm a graphic designer naturally, and so I just found different branches of art and design, and you know, start t-shirt company. Didn't work. You know, it's all these different things, and it's like I'd never clicked, never found that passion. And it's like you said, writing down what are your values, what do you value. Community, I value other people's stories, and that's how I got to podcasting. And while it has been tiring, and I have thought about tossing the towel. But now, as I mentioned earlier, is just setting up those healthy boundaries to do this one thing I like doing that I do receive that dopamine from, but within a boundary to where I'm not, as you said, when you're on Instagram, the first 20 minutes is great, but then when you get past a certain point, it's tiring and draining and not beneficial anymore. So it's like when you're tired, but you spring for the monster rather than the 30-minute power nap. One is way more beneficial, maybe a little bit longer of a time, and one is just a quick fix, and you're just going to feel groggy later. It's totally is where I'm thinking, and so I know when you wrote in that article, I have the quote here. You wrote, "We cannot leave the oppressor behind and claim to be doing the work of liberation." And I like that. It stood out to me for the reason of there's because like I said, I have that contemplation even in this platform of having guests on that I know people that are listening have history with. So I guess an example would be having an old pastor of mine. Come on, I've thought about, but I know there are guests that have been on this podcast that were friends of mine that have had the same pastor and maybe not have had a similar experience. And so when I read that quote, I was like, that for me, I know personally that person may have evolved and I know where they stand now is completely different from 10 years ago. And so, that for me was just like a heart check and like a gut check of like, am I leaving that person behind? And I think that's one thing to kind of be mindful of. And if you had any more thoughts to expound on.
Yeah, I think, I understand the need. Sometimes there's this need for separation, right? When something really difficult has happened, and sometimes grief requires that, like we have to have this space where we're not maybe confronted by that somebody's presence even, right? And we separate ourselves from them. And maybe it's never my job to reconnect with somebody who's really harmed me. That is also very real. However, that doesn't mean that no one should ever connect with that person, right? So I think that's maybe where some of the ambiguity in that can exist, where like the tension of like, yes, we don't want to leave them behind, but that doesn't mean that I need to go and get that person who harmed me. Hopefully somebody else will and can, right? I think maybe a really good example of this is Josh Harris, and his name comes up a lot. I've actually interviewed him on a podcast called Love Like a Heretic, and I loved having him on. I met him a couple years ago, and I know that he has been like through the ringer because of the book that he wrote, and there is a lot of harm done to a lot of people. And then and we talked about this in this podcast interview about how he put up this course to help people, deal with religious trauma and things like that. And people were up in arms over this, understandably so. And he took it down immediately because he heard what people were saying. He's like, wow, that was never his intention. And so of course he responded appropriately, I think. And then he has taken a lot of time to like really try to understand like, what is his place now? And I can't imagine just writing him off. I cannot imagine that. I read his book. His book certainly harmed me, but I had enough separation from it, and I did enough of my own work now to be able to see like he's human and he was harmed by the system too. Yes, he harmed other people, but I am in a position where I can reach out that hand to him. Not everybody needs to do that. Some people might feel harmed by him for their whole lives, and that is totally okay. So I'm also not trying to like call anybody out here. I'm just saying, if I know that I can be the one to reach my hand out, then I should do that if I have the capacity, right? And not everybody is going to. I know there are a couple other people like on Instagram, for example, with some large platforms, and not everybody's going to resonate with the things that maybe this, late 30s white dude is doing on his Instagram platform, but that doesn't mean it doesn't resonate for other people. So
Yeah.
I think we just have to keep coming back to this idea of like, we cannot eat our own. We should hold each other accountable. If somebody feels the capacity to reach their hand out, we should let them. And we don't need to be responsible for what everybody else does, right? As long as we're all moving in the
Yeah.
same direction, some people are going to take longer. I certainly have a lot more to learn. There is so much more for me to explore and be curious about. I want to make sure I offer that same ability to everybody else in this space, and not just assume that like just because they're here and they have a large platform that they are doing more harm. If I think they're doing more harm, that's on me to communicate to that person, hey, I think maybe you should do this other thing better. Not call them out, not drag them through the mud, not try to make their name bad, but to like help, right? And if we do that, then we do a better job than where we came from. And that's really what I want. I want humans to thrive and flourish and feel that work of liberation, that is wholeness of humanity. That includes all of us. And so when I wrote that about like, we are not doing the full work of this liberation, like I believe that the gospel is about liberation from the structures and systems. So if we're still expecting people to exist within a structure and system, we have not done the full work of liberation. And I want to be more part of that work than I do, providing checks and balances and like, did they say this right? And I'm not interested in that. I think being a human being is evolving and being curious and bringing other people along and, having tough conversations, and those are all skills that we need to practice. So, myself included, like I practice all the time and I fail all the time, but I want to get better. And it is really all about like the wholeness of humanity. When I keep that in my mind, I am going to approach other human beings in a better way.
Yeah. Yeah, it just goes back to what we talked about before. And you just mentioned again, it always circles back to accountability and being ready for it and being open to it. So I think when someone doesn't want any accountability, that's when red flags pop up, and maybe you should distance yourself. And so, but yeah, I think that's a nice, as nice of any spot to kind of wrap up. And so, yeah, what are you doing? Anything you want to plug? Projects or?
Yeah, so I am working.
What are you up to? Where can we find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Rebecca Lynn Writes, spelled, just like Rebecca, 2 C's, not the Old Testament way, Rebecca Lynn Writes. I do have a website. It is reblcoaching.com. So I am working on a book right now. I'm currently working on the first draft, and it is all about becoming more of this rebel. So my name, Rebecca Lynn, got shortened to Rebel, REBL. And so to me, those letters mean something. My goal is always to become more rooted, more expansive, more brave, so that I can truly be liberated. And I really want to help other people also do the same. So the book is going to be about that. How do we create this life where we are all of these things and we don't shrink back, and we learn how to have brave conversations and know who we are and truly be rooted. Because I really I want the liberation of this full humanity, right? That's really what I want.
Great. Thank you for coming on and sharing and rehashing what you wrote on Substack, and I'll be sure to put it in the bottom in the link or bio wherever people will find it. That way they can read it as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.